Hey, I'm your imaginary friend, and today I've got for you another story by Guy de Maupassant. This is called Spectre, or it sometimes appears with the title Apparition. um, yeah, again, I should probably get in the habit of, sometimes I forget to preface with Luke Westaway's wise words of warning that sometimes the real horror is Victorian attitudes towards class, mental health, gender, anything, really. Uh, that being said, let's get into it. They were talking about sequestration in connection with a recent lawsuit. It was at the close of a friendly gathering one evening in the Rue de Grenelle, and each of them had told a story he claimed to be true. Then the old Marquis de la Tour Samuel got to his feet, a man 82 years of age. He went across to lean on the mantelpiece and told his story in a rather shaky voice. I know one strange case myself, a case so strange that it has been an obsession all my life. It is now 56 years since this incident occurred, and not a month has passed in which I have not seen it again in my dreams. A sort of mark, an impression left by fear, if you understand me, has remained with me ever since that day. For 10 minutes I experienced such appalling terror that ever since a sort of constant fear has possessed my soul. Unexpected noises make me shudder to the depths of my being, and objects half hidden in the gloom of evening fill me with a crazy desire to run away. I'm afraid of the dark, in fact. Oh, I wouldn't have admitted this before reaching my present age. Now I can tell you anything. When you're 82, you're not obliged to be brave in the presence of imaginary dangers. I can assure you, ladies, that I have never flinched in the face of real danger. This affair upset me so completely and caused me such deep, mysterious, terrible distress that I have never spoken about it to anyone. I've kept it in the depths of my innermost being, in those depths where we hide the painful secrets, the shameful secrets, all the unconfessed weaknesses of our lives. I'm going to tell you about it exactly as it happened, without attempting to explain it. There's no doubt that an explanation could be found, unless I happened to be mad at the time. But no, I was not mad, and I'll prove it to you. You may think what you like. Here are the simple facts. It happened in 1827, in the month of July. I was then stationed in Rouen. One day, as I was walking along the quayside, I met a man whom I thought I recognized. Without being able to recall exactly who he was, I made an instinctive movement as if to stop. The stranger noticed this, looked at me, then rushed up and flung his arms around me. He was a friend of my youth to whom I had been deeply attached. In the 5 years that had elapsed since I had last seen him, he seemed to have aged half a century. His hair was completely white, and he walked with a stoop, as though exhausted. He realized how surprised I was and began to tell me his life story. He'd been shattered by a terrible misfortune. Having fallen madly in love, he had married the girl in a state of ecstasy, but after a year of superhuman bliss and unquenchable passion, she had suddenly died of some heart condition, killed by love itself, no doubt. He'd left his chateau on the very day of her burial, and had come to live in his house in Rouen. There he existed, lonely and desperate, consumed by grief, so wretched that he thought of nothing but suicide. Now that I've met you like this, he said, I will ask you to do me a great favor. I'd like you to go to my former home and get me some papers, which I need urgently. I cannot send a junior officer or solicitor on a job of this kind. I need someone who is the soul of discretion and who will keep absolute silence about it. As for myself, there's nothing on earth would induce me to go back into that house. I will give you the key to this bedroom, which I locked myself when I left, and the key to my desk. In addition, I'll let you have a note to give to my gardener, so he will open the chateau for you. But come and have breakfast with me tomorrow, and we'll have a chat about it. I promised to do this small favor for him. It was, in fact, only a short outing for me. as his property was about 20 kilometers from Rouen. It would take me an hour on horseback. At 10 o'clock the next morning I went round to see him. We had breakfast together, just the two of us, but he hardly spoke. He asked me to forgive him, and explained that he was upset by the thought that I was about to visit the room which had once been the scene of his happiness. He really did seem strangely agitated and preoccupied, as though some mysterious struggle were taking place in his soul. Eventually he explained to me exactly what I had to do. It was very simple. I had to get 2 bundles of letters and one of papers, which were locked away in the first drawer on the right of the desk for which I had the key. To his instructions he added the remark, "I needn't ask you not to look at them." I was rather hurt by these words, and I told him so, rather sharply. He stammered, "Forgive me, I'm upset," and he started weeping. I left him at about 1 o'clock and set out on my mission. The weather was glorious, and I rode through the meadows at a steady trot, listening to the singing of the larks and the rhythm of my sword tapping against my boot. Then I entered the forest and slowed my horse down to a walking pace. As I rode on, branches brushed lightly against my face, and occasionally I would catch a leaf between my teeth and chew it greedily in one of those moments when you feel full of the joys of life, when for some reason or other you are filled with a tumultuous, elusive happiness, a kind of rapture of strength. As I drew near the chateau, I felt in my pocket for the letter I had for the gardener, and I was astonished to find that it was sealed. I was so surprised and annoyed that I nearly went back without completing my errand. But it occurred to me that if I did so, I would be displaying an ill-mannered susceptibility. In the state he was in, my friend might easily have sealed the note without paying any attention to what he did. His country house seemed to have been deserted for 20 years. The open gate was rotten, but standing upright, somehow or other. The paths were all overgrown with grass. The flower beds were no longer distinguishable from the lawn. In response to the noise I made by kicking on a shutter, an old man came out of a side door and looked at me in astonishment. I jumped down from my horse and handed him the letter. He read it, reread it, turned it over, looked at me furtively, put the folded paper in his pocket and said, "Well, what do you want?" I replied abruptly, "You ought to know. You've just received your master's orders. I want to enter the chateau." He seemed stupefied. "Then you're going into her room?" I began to lose patience. "I certainly am. Do you by any chance intend to cross-examine me?" "No, monsieur," he stammered. "But the trouble is, it's not been opened since the death. If you'll just give me 5 minutes, I'll go and see if..." I interrupted him angrily. "Now look here. What do you take me for? You can't get into the room because I've got the key here." He could think of nothing to say to this, except, "Very well, monsieur, I'll show you the way. Show me the staircase, and then leave me. I shall easily be able to find the room on my own." "But, monsieur, even so..." This time I became really angry. "Now just be quiet," I snapped, "or there's going to be trouble." I pushed him roughly aside and went into the house. First of all, I passed through the kitchen, then through 2 small rooms where this man and his wife lived. Next I crossed a large hall and went up the stairs and found the door which my friend had described to me. I opened it without any difficulty and went in. The room was so dark that at first I could see nothing clearly. I stopped short, my nostrils assailed by that stale and musty odour of rooms which are unused, locked up, condemned to death. Then gradually my eyes became accustomed to the darkness, and I saw fairly clearly that I was in a large bedroom, left in disorder. The bed was without sheets, but it still retained the mattress and pillows, in one of which I noticed a deep impression, as though made by an elbow or a head which had just been resting on it. The chairs seemed to have been moved out of their places. I noticed that a door, probably leading to a storeroom, had been left half open. I first went over to the window in order to let in some daylight. I opened it, but the fastenings of the shutters outside were so rusty that I could not move them. I even tried to break them with my sword, without success. As I was getting irritated by my useless efforts, and as my eyes had by now become completely accustomed to the semi-darkness, I gave up hope of getting proper light into the room and went over to the desk. I sat down in an armchair, let down the lid of the desk, and opened the drawer indicated by my friend. It was completely full of letters and papers. I only needed the 3 bundles whose description I'd been given, and I started to look for them. I was straining my eyes, trying to read the details, when I thought I heard, or rather thought I sensed, a kind of rustling behind me. I paid no attention to it, thinking that a draft might have moved a curtain or some other material in the room. But a minute later, another sound, barely audible, sent a strange and unpleasant tingling sensation all over my skin. It was so silly of me to be nervous, even though I was only slightly nervous, that I felt it a point of honor to resist the impulse to turn around. By this time I had just found the second of the bundles I needed, and I was about to take out the third, when I heard, just behind my shoulder, a long, heavy sigh. I jumped out of the chair like a madman, and found myself standing a couple of yards away. As I jumped, I turned round, instinctively grasping the hilt of my sword, and I assure you, if I had not felt it by my side, I should have fled like a coward. A tall woman, dressed in white, was staring at me. She was standing behind the chair in which I had been sitting a second or two earlier. Such a shudder ran through my limbs that I nearly fell over backwards. Oh, nobody can possibly understand, unless he has actually experienced it, this kind of appalling, unreasonable terror. Your very being seems to melt away. Your heart seems to have stopped beating. Your whole body becomes as soft as a sponge, and you feel as though your innermost self is crumbling away. I do not believe in ghosts, and yet I was ready to faint with that hideous fear of the dead, and oh, I suffered more in those few moments than in all the rest of my life from the irresistible anguish of supernatural terror. If she had not spoken, I might have died with fright, but she did speak, in a gentle, grief-stricken voice which made my nerves quiver. I would not dare claim that I recovered my self-control and began to think clearly again. No, I was so shaken that I hardly knew what I was doing. But this self-respect of mine, and also a bit of my professional pride as an officer, made me put on a brave face, almost in spite of myself. I was putting it on for my own benefit, and no doubt for hers, whoever she was, woman or ghost. I only realized this later on, for I can assure you that when I saw the apparition, I could think of nothing. I was simply terrified. She said, "Oh, monsieur, you can do me a great favor." I tried to reply, but I found it impossible to utter a single word. Just a vague sound came from my throat. She continued, "Will you? You can save me. You can cure me. I'm suffering terrible pain. I'm in such pain. Oh, such pain." She slowly sat down in the armchair, and still looking at me, she said, "Will you?" I nodded, yes, my voice was still paralyzed. And she held out a tortoise-shell comb, murmuring, "Comb my hair. Oh, just comb my hair. That will cure me. All I need is someone to comb my hair. Look at my face. You can see how much I am suffering, and how much my hair is hurting me." Her loose hair, very long and black it seemed to me, was hanging over the back of the chair and touching the floor. Why did I do it? Why did I take hold of that comb, shuddering as I did so, and why did I take between my fingers her long black hair, which sent a horrible, chilly sensation all over my skin, just as though I were handling snakes? I've no idea why I did it. I can still feel that sensation in my fingers, and it makes me shudder when I think about it. I combed her hair. Somehow or other I handled those icy locks. I entwined her hair, tied it, and loosened it. I even plaited it in the way that you plait a horse's mane. She kept sighing, leaning her head forward, and apparently was happy. Suddenly she said, "Thank you. snatched the comb from my hand, and fled out of the room through the half-open door that I had noticed earlier. Left alone, I experienced for a few seconds that confused feeling of dismay which you get when you wake up after a nightmare. Then I pulled myself together, ran to the window, and with a vigorous push burst open the shutters. Daylight flooded into the room. I rushed over to the door, which this mysterious being had disappeared. I found it shut and impossible to open. I was suddenly overcome by a frenzied desire to escape, real panic, the kind of panic that is experienced on the battlefield. I grabbed the 3 bundles from the open desk, ran across the room, rushed down the stairs 4 at a time, got out of the house somehow or other, and, seeing my horse just a few yards away, jumped into the saddle and galloped off. I didn't stop until I got back at my house in Rouen. Throwing the reins to my servant, I ran into my room and locked the door so I could be left in peace to think about what had happened. For a whole hour, I anxiously asked myself whether or not I had been the victim of a hallucination. Surely I had experienced one of those incomprehensible nervous upsets, one of those mental aberrations which give rise to miracles and to which the supernatural owes its power. And I was beginning to think it had been some kind of illusion, some error made by my senses, when I went over to the window and happened to glance down. The jacket of my uniform was covered with hairs, long hairs from the head of a woman, all entwined round the buttons. I took them one by one, and with trembling fingers threw them out of the window. Then I called my servant. I felt too upset, too confused, to go to my friend's house straight away. And moreover, I wanted time to think about exactly what I ought to tell him. I sent him his letters, and he gave my servant a receipt for them. He apparently asked a lot of questions about me. My servant told him that I was not well, that I had got sunstroke or something of the kind. He was apparently very worried. I went round to his place the next day, as soon as it was light, having made up my mind to tell him the truth. He had gone out the previous evening and had not returned. I went back again later in the day, but nothing had been seen of my friend. I waited a week. There was still no sign of him. Then I notified the authorities. They searched for him everywhere, but they were unable to discover any clue about how he had disappeared or where he was. A thorough inspection was made of the empty chateau. They found nothing to arouse suspicion. There was no indication that a woman had ever been concealed there. As the inquiry never got anywhere, the investigations were discontinued. And in the 56 years since it happened, I have heard nothing more. That's all I can tell you about it.